All right, I see the clocks have flipped to 1 o'clock now, so we'll go ahead and get our webinar kicked off. I'm Megan Weber. I'm an extension educator focusing on aquatic invasive species, and I'm excited to welcome our guest today for the Aquatic Invasive Species webinar series. We have Rainey White and Steve Smith here to share some case studies on Starry Stonewort and Manoomin. The webinar is getting started now. We do use a tool called Slido for the Q&A portion. So you can go on over to slido.com and you can use the event code Manoomin, and it'll allow you to put your questions in there. And you can also go to upvote so that the questions that people want to hear most get answered first. And that way, if we run out of time, hopefully the ones that most people are interested in hearing get those answers. I'll have another slide that'll come up during the Q&A to help navigate you there. But feel free to drop questions in at any point during the presentations, and it'll collect them, and then we'll start asking them once we get to the Q&A portion. We are also recording today, so you can watch for a recording to go onto our YouTube channel. It usually takes a week or two for us to get through the transcription of that. This is a little bit longer webinar too, so maybe plan on the longer time frame of that. But we do have them viewable along with all of our past webinars. You can head on over to the YouTube channel at z.umn.edu/AISTube to see those. And everyone is muted today, but if you have any questions, be sure to use that Q&A feature. We're also available via chat. So if you're having like some tech difficulties or need to get a hold of one of us, we also have Michelle here underneath the AIS Detectors program label, and she'll be able to help you with any of those kinds of things. So feel free to use the chat feature as needed for issues like that. That is all that I have today in terms of housekeeping. So I am going to turn it over to Rainey and Steve to introduce themselves, and they'll just kick right into their presentations from there.
Thanks, Megan. I'm Rainey White. I work for the Leech Lake Band, Ojibwe, the Division of Resource Management. I work in the botany department, or we call it the plant resources, with a big focus on invasive species, both terrestrial and aquatic. We also do some work on sensitive species, threatened, endangered, rare species, getting into a little bit more restoration as we go into these different projects and kind of everything botany related. So at the DRM, we're really holistic in our views on management. So we work with across, disciplines with our forestry, environmental, water quality, all these things. So thanks for having me, and I look forward to the presentation.
Good afternoon. My name is Steve Smith. I am currently a PhD candidate at the University of Minnesota in the Fisheries, Wildlife, and Conservation Biology Department in Dr. Dan Larkin's lab. I am an enrolled member of the White Earth Band, but have lived on the Leech Lake Reservation my entire life. For a period of time right out of undergrad, I worked in a lab doing a lot of analytical chemistry type stuff. And then for about 12 years, I taught at the Leech Lake Tribal College, primarily biology and chemistry courses. And I have, I'm going to start the presentation. So I'll start our presentation, and after a bit, Rainey will pick it up and give us some more detail on Dash and some other activities he has. We have a MASERC funded research project we've been working on for the last few years. And our concern is what would happen if Starry Stonewort and wild rice meet, and what would be the implications of this interaction. So Starry Stonewort, I think a lot of you are probably familiar with this. This is a growing concern in the region for aquatic resource managers. So Starry Stonewort's been around in the North America for a while, and it's reached inland lakes in Minnesota in 2015. And there are currently, I think, 35 lakes that have been identified in Minnesota that have confirmed Starry Stonewort. So it is a growing concern, and it can take up a lot of space, create these pillows, and crowd out a lot of our native macrophytes, our native aquatic plants. And currently on the Leech Lake Reservation, there are a number of lakes that have confirmed sightings of Starry Stonewort. including some rice, some lakes that are significant locations for wild rice. So wild rice is a hugely important resource for indigenous people in this region. Ojibwe people, Dakota people have been harvesting wild rice for centuries. And it's part of everything. It's part of the history. It's part of the spirituality. It's part of the lore. And people have been harvesting it the same way for a long time, and they continue to harvest it the same way in canoes. And the Ojibwe call it Manoomin. So an interesting thing has happened. So in the 50s, in the 1950s, University of Minnesota started trying to domesticate wild rice. They were hybridizing plants and trying to create a product they could grow in fields, cultivated. And eventually that led to some genomic testing. And that created a tension between tribes in Minnesota and the University of Minnesota. And there were fights at the state legislature and things like that. And tribes wanted to protect the genetic integrity of the natural rice. They were concerned that some product or pollen from these cultivated stands could spread into the natural wild rice and genetically contaminate it. So there's always been this. So for a long time, there's been this tension between tribes and the University of Minnesota regarding rice. And this project is part of, there's a number of projects now where University of Minnesota is actually trying to do better by tribes. And MASERC has had a working relationship with the Leech Lake Band and other tribes in the region, and trying to do research that benefits the tribes and is kind of in tune with their concerns as well. So in 2021, we were always concerned, even before there was confirmed, a lot of confirmed sightings in Minnesota. There was always concern at Leech Lake, like what would happen if Starry Stonewort reached a wild rice bed. They occupy similar habitats, and we thought this could be a concern. And in 2021, it was confirmed. There was a confirmed sighting of Starry Stonewort on Leech Lake, adjacent to a significant wild rice bed. And prior MASERC research has shown that Starry Stonewort can reduce native plants, negatively impact native macrophytes, reduce their total numbers and their species diversity. And we always wondered, like, what would be the relationship between Starry Stonewort and wild rice. And one thing that's an interesting piece to this puzzle is they have different phenologies. Starry Stonewort will reach peak biomass late in the year, like about this time of year, and most of our other native macrophytes are flourishing and reaching peak biomass early in the year. So maybe there's a possibility that there could be some level of coexistence realized. But we do see areas right now like this. This is stalks of wild rice, and we see Starry Stonewort growing right up underneath it. So the MASERC has been working with Starry Stonewort since 2015, and they had a relationship working with the Leech Lake Band on some other invasive species issues prior to the discovery of Starry Stonewort in Leech Lake. So there was that history. And after the confirmation of 2021, we started working with a MASERC rapid response grant in 2021 and into 2022 to assess that situation and try to make plans for a larger research project. And for the last two and a half years, we've been working with under a MASERC funded research project to try to assess what exactly may happen with the wild rice. So our research team, we have two members from the Leech Lake Department of Resource Management, Raining and Kate. Dr. Dan Larkin is the head of the project. Naomi Blinnick and Dr. Muthukrishnan were also part of it, and myself. And really what we were initially trying to do is improve surveillance methods using some existing data and trying to see if there's better ways to detect Starry Stonewort early, and what is its impact on the wild rice beds, and also provide support to the Leech Lake Band through training and some other products to try to help them manage for Starry Stonewort and other invasive species. So our study site, this is the Leech Lake Reservation. Leech Lake is a significant water body, and on the western side of Leech Lake, in Steamboat Bay, there's a resort that has an artificial harbor, and the Starry Stonewort was initially introduced into that harbor. And here's an overhead view. So Starry Stonewort spread from the harbor and got out into what is a natural, significant wild rice stand. The tribal members are there's a number of tribal members that harvest rice here every year. Here's an overhead kind of look at the scene here, kind of late in the year last year. But you can see the harbor there, and there's some natural channels that come out, and they're really just maintained through boat traffic. And we've got rice on both sides of both of these channels. So part of our project was to monitor Starry Stonewort advancement in these channels and track other macrophytes as well. So we had a number of quadrats that we were assessing twice a year, spring and fall of each year, and trying to see how quickly Starry Stonewort is advancing. And we do this with diving underwater quadrats and collecting our data underwater, documenting total species counts, percent covers. Another component of this research project is looking at kind of a more of a high resolution look at what exactly is happening right at the interface. So I set up a number of grids right at the interface, and this is, we've got Starry Stonewort right up against a natural stand of wild rice here, and set up grids that consist of 6 adjacent meter square quadrats, and set them up right on that interface. So like the medium or the middle 2 quadrats had a mix of Starry Stonewort wild rice. Further in, we had just wild rice, and the channel side quadrats had just Starry Stonewort at the beginning. And I track these bi-weekly, all last year and this growing season, and monitored percent cover of all aquatic plants present, and biomass of Starry Stonewort, and wild rice stem counts and biomass of the wild rice. And we were interested in how is this Starry Stonewort advancement impacting the native plant communities. And here's some more pictures of positioning grids, getting them in place, and that's how they look underwater. And there's quite a few, 20, 25 different species that I've identified in these quadrats throughout the season. And what we've seen is this is data from last growing season. The Starry Stonewort biomass and percent cover increased in every grid throughout their growing season. And it's interesting, from the prior fall, most of the Starry Stonewort will actually die back in the wintertime. So in the spring, even this spring, we had a lot of Starry Stonewort last fall, and early this spring, there was a lot of these areas that was just nothing there, but it kind of roared back again. And so we are seeing Starry Stonewort biomass increase across the board and a reduction in other native macrophytes. And another thing we're trying to determine, besides just presence or absence of the wild rice, is it having some effect on the growth and productivity of wild rice? There seems to be more underdeveloped wild rice stems in these Starry Stonewort areas. And so we're trying to track that and make some assessment of what impact does Starry Stonewort have on the growth of wild rice. So there are some other species that seem to be a little immune to Starry's advancement. This Naja guadalupensis, it peaks later in the year, kind of like Starry, but in areas where there's a significant group patch of this guadalupensis, Starry Stonewort kind of stops. It doesn't advance into the guadalupensis. So that's another thing we're investigating. Is there some kind of mechanism that's preventing the Starry from getting under the guadalupensis? Is there some kind of allelopathic interaction, or is it just a matter of space? And but the guadalupensis also peaks later in the fall. So we're tracking that. So another thing we're doing with this project is assessing the effectiveness of removal techniques. So dash removal is diver assisted suction harvest, and Raining will get into this a little bit more later in the presentation. What we're trying to, we try with some difficulty. We were trying to see how effective dash removal is. So we had some areas in this study site we removed with dash. We did some random pre and post testing in those areas of wild rice and other macrophytes, other aquatic plants. And it's a little, Raining will get in this a little bit later, but it was a little difficult to dash in this area. And we also did a number of stem counts, wild rice, looking at wild rice and random points, the growth and productivity, stem counts, assess the health and productivity of the wild rice. And we're also in each of those. So we'd take samples in each of those random quadrats, some rake samples, and identify and get biomass of all the aquatic plants in those quadrats. So what we've seen so far is the Starry Stonewort is definitely advancing, and it's moved further into the rice a little ways anyway. But we're unsure how exactly the productivity of the wild rice is affected. Other macrophytes have been negatively impacted. See a significant decline in biomass and species richness of other macrophytes in these areas where Starry Stonewort has taken over. And it was always we always wondered what would happen. So they have different, Starry Stonewort and wild rice have different growth forms. Starry Stonewort stays kind of hugs the bottom and can occupy a lot of space. But our wild rice plants, if they can germinate and the seeds can get above the rice, will those plants be okay? Will they be able to grow effectively? Last year, last growing season, it seemed like the Starry was really piling in there, and it was even up to this time of year, it was still real green and increasing in biomass. It's looked a little different this year. The biomass has actually declined in some of these areas, and we see some of our quadrats that were full of Starry are looking a little like the Starry's actually dying away already in some of these areas. It looks brownish, a little bit thinner. So we're not entirely sure what's happening with that. Another component of our research that I'm starting this fall is to do a growth experiment and try to determine what happened, what are the how is nitrogen impacting the competition. Wild rice is limited by nitrogen, and it gets a lot of the nitrogen that's used from decaying biomass. So all of the rice plants, all that biomass senesces and falls into the lake. And the decomposition of that material is the key source of nitrogen for following year's growth of wild rice. So nitrogen is a key factor for wild rice. And charophytes like Starry have been reported to be in certain circumstances nitrogen sinks, where they can take up some nitrogen and other nutrients and hold it, make it unavailable for other other plants. So I'm setting up a growth experiment to try to determine what's happening with that nitrogen competition, looking at how it impacts the growth of these two species at different levels of nitrogen, and also trying to factor in a little bit of a density treatment as well. Does it matter how dense or how thick the wild rice plants are, or how much starry is there? How does that impact the nitrogen ability as well? So I will turn it over to Raining, and we'll be available for questions as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. That was a great presentation. Glad you're able to give it, and it'll be hard to follow, but I will start my screen share here. Thanks. Bonjour, give me one addition cause cha-cha bonning and dunjaba, Mikizi Dudame. I want to thank everyone for taking time out of your day to listen to us speak for the rice, speak about the rice, the Manoomin. My name is Rating White. I work for the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe, Division of Resource Management in the Plant Resources Department. The Deputy Director / field person. I do a lot of field work and try to stay away from the admin stuff, but it's not always the case. I think Steve did a great job talking about the history of Starry Stonewort, which is not a true plant, but a macro algae. And it has relatives in Minnesota. It has native caras. You might have heard them referred to as stoneworts. Somebody once called them skunkweed, muskgrass, different things like that. So if you look close enough at a lake, you'll see this cara kind of all over the place, and you'll see similar looking beings to Starry Stonewort. So we both use this AIS Explorer, which is a great tool developed by Mazurk, but it's really good at showing the lakes within the reservation there. That's Leech Lake Reservation. It's not quite updated, although I don't think we have any new ones. The red is infested. The green is high risk of being infested, or at least some risk. This year, we haven't had any new infestations within our reservation boundary, but it is close. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but there's a couple lakes to the west of us that have been confirmed really recently. So, with so much boater traffic in and out, we got 3 of the largest 10 lakes. There is a very high risk of this Starry Stonewort moving in between bottom, infesting new waters. So total, I'll back up a little bit. I'm going to talk about our management of Starry Stonewort, not so much the data. I think Steve did a good job of covering that in the experiments and the research project. But so we've dashed on 5 sites this year. Leech Lake on Steamboat Bay, where a lot of the Mazurk project took place. The Mississippi River between Andrusia Lake and Wolf Lake, which is those 2 lakes you kind of see on the northwestern corner there, the big one being Cass, but Andrusia is connected to that. We also went up to Pamoosh, which is this kind of long lake on the north, that flat border. for the first time this year, and also Wolf Lake, where we did mostly hand pulling, but also a little bit of dash assessment. And outside of Starry Stonewort, we did some Eurasian water milfoil, EWM treatment on Town Line Lake, which is on the southeast corner of the reservation. So just to back up again too, I want to talk about Manoomin and kind of what it means to, Anishinaabe people, especially Leech Lake. We have branded ourselves as the stronghold of Manoomin, because we have a ton, I'd be willing to say the most Manoomin in the world is within our reservation. High concentrations, high quality beds, harvestable beds, that our band members, other people living within the reservation that may not be band members utilize. Wildlife utilizes it, and it's part of this kind of sacred web that we call, the ecology of the region. You'll hear often the Manoomin being called like a relative to the Anishinaabe. And I remember a few years ago when I was kind of getting into this work and paying more attention to aquatic invasive species, somebody asked me, like, what do you mean it's a relative? Like, you think it's, your brother or your cousin or something? And I kind of had to think about it in that sense. And it's not a relative in that kind of literal sense, but we have a relation with it that we really value as Anishinaabe people and as resource management professionals for the Leech Lake Reservation. We're civil servants for our tribal band members. And that relation comes down to how we use it and how we treat it. You'll find Manoomin at naming ceremonies for our newborns. A lot of people's first food was Manoomin. A lot of people's last food is Manoomin. It's at our funerals. It's at our ceremonies. It's at everything in between, even from just potlucks at the office. So I really want to reiterate that it's not, besides being just a plant, it is this, interwoven with our culture, our history, our economics, all these things that are kind of outside this like data-centered research stuff. So it's always, when we talk about it, when you hear it being called a relative, that's what we mean, that we have a relation with it. And then that relation builds out into, I'm a big waterfowl hunter. When I look in the gizzards of my ducks, there's wild rice, and they're eating the same thing. So they're my relation. The fish spawn in it and use it for protection and habitat and all these things. So that's kind of the meeting of relation. It's not my brother didn't, bully me growing up, but it takes care of me in a way. It takes care of all Anishinaabe people. And that's, if you're familiar with our migration story, that's why we're here on Leech Lake. Kind of touted as the last stop of this migration was Leech Lake, Bear Island area, Sugar Point. And there's a reason that we came here is because it's food for us, it's sustenance, and it sustains us. And the folks here, the people here before us used it the same way. So we kind of got interested in aquatic invasive species work. Historically, my department was a lot of terrestrial work. So we expanded our program and we started looking at aquatic invasive species because of the threats to our sovereignty, our gathering rights, and then our Manoomin. So we found out about this contraption called a diver-assisted suction harvest machine, DASH. As you can see, it's basically a big pontoon. It has kind of a similar system to a shop vac, so a wet dry vac. It deploys a venturi tube to create suction. It can be fed, plants, and then the water returns to the lake, and then we can separate out our targeted species, return wildlife that may be kind of a bycatch, and return native plant species. And so we wanted to do it this way because we have a history of non-chemical use. We have tribal ordinances that delegate how we can use chemicals, which most often is, not at all, except in very special circumstances. And that's because there's been history of other agencies in our area doing kind of broadcast spraying of our natural resources We had our tribal gatherers and, elders saying, they're seeing blueberries dying, or they're seeing deer looking unhealthy. So that culminated into this action by our leadership to take a look at pesticides and kind of exert our sovereignty into, going away from chemical treatments and kind of figuring out how we can deal with these things without dumping chemicals into sensitive areas, affecting our tribal members' harvesting rights, and what alternates there are, which is kind of, I think, part of the theme of this webinar is alternate treatments. So this is our way to treat AIS, plants, aquatic invasive species, mostly plants. Zebra mussels might be a tricky one with this, but open to trying anything. So we bought this machine from a private lake association. They used it for Eurasian water milfoil. Steve kind of went over the history of Starry Stonewort in our area, and we figured, let's try it for that. We're kind of desperate. We kind of got a wake up call with Starry Stonewort being found so close to a major rice bed that gets thousands and thousands of pounds of rice for our provides thousands of pounds of rice for our members, which is a huge economic boost, food sovereignty issue, all these things. So we just kind of dove right into it. I got dive certified. A couple of my other coworkers got dive certified. We ran through the machine with the person who sold it to us, and we just went at it. So it was kind of not suited for Starry Stonewort in the beginning because, as most of us may know, if you're familiar with Starry Stonewort, it can fragment and create further spread, infestations elsewhere. So really, after that first summer that we used this, we have to take a look at this and modify kind of our system. So kind of in the off season, we were lucky to have access to our pole barn. And we changed the table. If you look at this picture here, there's kind of a big blocky white table. It's kind of homemade, kind of put together. It was really heavy. So we contacted, did some research with other companies that use this technology. And we found out this table that a lot of people used, and used a system that pumps water, has the same exact, what we want to do, basically. It came from a gold mining, I guess, gold panning company. But the table is really brilliant. It has 3 tiers of screens on it. We rerouted the outtake, so the water flow that's going back to the lake, we put it directly under the table, which was after these pictures. So the water flows out, keep it a little bit safer, a little bit cleaner. We decreased the water pressure, so we're not getting a lot of bycatch. We increased the screen density, so not a lot of fragments were getting out. And it was just all around safer and a better system, easier to use, things like that. This was last summer. Well, this was this summer, actually, 2025. You can kind of see the change that we went through there on the left side. I got a diver in the water. We got buoys kind of behind that diver where we did like a pre-survey and we marked out, where do we want to do removal at, which we didn't do before. We focused on, really, this was for Eurasian water milfoil, so we were really concerned about fragmentation. So we got kind of like a butterfly net, so another crew member up top can kind of mitigate that. Our screen was really effective. There's 2 more screens under this one that were catching fragments. So we were really getting into the groove of using this and deploying it and kind of getting a system set up to be effective, efficient, and safe. So on this left-hand picture, it is selective, but there is just some bycatch because it is high pressure, and Eurasian water milfoil or Starry Stonewort, as you saw on Steve's slide, doesn't really mind its own business, I guess you could say. So it's kind of growing within these other species, these native species. So we did have some bycatch and some disturbance. There's some water celery there, some lilies, water shield, maybe some pond weeds, things like that. But it was, to the best of our ability, kept to a minimum. We're also working in these areas that, for this lake on the right where we're doing work, it's right off people's shores, right in the lily pads, mucky, kind of rough conditions to work in. But we wanted to focus on what it's going to cost this species to spread, whether it's starry or Eurasian, and that's usually boat traffic, human activity. So we wanted to focus on these areas and worked with the Lake Association to say, hey, where would you like to see work done? What can we do that meets both our goals? And you can also see the buoys out there marking our location. So we're pretty accurate, not, spending a ton of time swimming around looking for it. So that was really important to us to kind of leave the native beneficial species alone as much as we can, while also targeting what we're there to remove and where we're targeting it, right? High traffic areas, close to access where boats are coming in and out, things of that nature. So it's kind of just reiterating what I've been talking about. We like that there's no chemicals. I gave the history of why we don't use chemicals, herbicides, pesticides, things like that. It's targeted, etc. We own it, which was a big one. You kind of get a sticker shock if anyone's been part of a lake association or works for management of AIS, some private companies. It's expensive, and it rightfully so. It's a lot of labor, it's a lot of gear, specialized gear, things like that. So the training and gear was kind of challenging, to get people that I've never scuba dived. I can barely swim, to be honest. So I'm thankful for a VCD. It's weather dependent. So, you can't go out early spring when the water's, just going over 40 degrees, you wouldn't be able to last too long. And then, any kind of inclement weather, lightning and things, we're immediately off the water. And you kind of need a big crew. So we need at least 2 divers. Always dive with a buddy. You need somebody to operate, turn the pump on, sort the plants out. And we also like to have a spotter to wave down boats if they're coming too close, or, be on the lookout for fragmentations that's floating by, things like that. So it's very labor intensive, and kind of the cost we put into it is fairly high, but we made it work. So one of our sites initially was the Mississippi River, which is kind of unique to Starry Stonewort and Cara in general, kind of like Steve said, the same kind of environment that Manoomin like. So slow moving water. So we were really surprised to find it at the Mississippi River. Has a pretty good flow, especially in the kind of high water years. But this was kind of like a resort, so they had kind of like a makeshift harbor. Is kind of, so the water slowed down right at this area. The docks helped with that, the boats there, things like that, cattails. So we were shocked to see Starry Stonewort. This is about 5 feet of water, and it's touching almost the surface of the water. You can see some Manoomin sticking out there. So we removed a lot, and what we found is that repeated treatments reduce biomass, and I wanted to bold temporarily. We've dashed here for 3 years now, and every year we come back, getting ready to decide when to hit it, when it's going to be most effective. And besides other plant diversity coming back, some Manoomin and pondweeds that are starting to thrive a little more, the Starry Stonewort is still acting exactly the same. And I believe that's due to bulbils. Another area that we focused on, and Steve went over this as well, is Steamboat Bay. This picture is really cool, I think. This is the resort's beach, that's not a natural beach. And, maybe 25, 30 yards from the beach is one of our biggest, most productive rice beds. So the resort owners are gracious enough to, respect our treaty rights and allow us access to this rice bed. And there wasn't any need for, flexing our treaty rights or going in there and just doing it anyway. But, we had a good working relationship with this resort. Our band members have been ricing there forever. And it's really high quality rice bed in most years. And you can see that kind of play toy right there. It's to me, it's a funny picture because, the way you look at a lake can change so much between individuals. I see this picture for the rice, and someone may see this picture for a nice beach or a swim area. And it can be both. They can coexist. So this area was quite a bit larger than the Mississippi River, and it was really close to this rice bed. So that's kind of, Steve went over that, kind of where our Mazurk project started. We did some removals. We skipped the removal this year, which I'll get to. But this one, the one that we're kind of keeping a really close eye on. It's a shallow bay. This elder told me that you could walk across the bay and not have water go up past your chin. So it's about 5 feet, almost directly across to what they call Oak Point. It's a great bay for Manoomin. But we've heard from our band members that, it's not what it used to be. And is Starry Stonewort contributing to that decline, which is kind of what we've been exploring. So Steve touched on the permanent plots that we're recording Starry Stonewort expansion. We plan to do that kind of indefinitely, just so we get an idea that how fast it's kind of spreading out, and maybe there is considerations for a different control method, or maybe they can coexist. For Dash, we paused our treatments this year, just due to capacity, and also we really want to take a look at, are we effective in sites like this where it's high biomass of Starry Stonewort? Are we kind of treading water? Are we wasting time, so to speak? So I really want to explore more kind of how can we measure effectiveness of the Dash, which, due to technical issues, capacity, time, we didn't really get a lot of hard data from those kind of first experiments we put on. So if anyone wants to work with us, we're totally open to it. Continuing on, that the project started, like the actual field work started in the summer of 22. We established monitoring plots, tried to quantify Dash's effect on Starry Stonewort. The big question was, does Starry Stonewort compete directly with Manoomin? And is it a negative impact? Which we still, don't quite know, which is Steve's looking into. And I'm very excited to see results of that. So we continued installing monitoring plots to get a broader picture of those channels you saw in that nice aerial photo. Looking at competition, looking at what's there, what's thriving, what's not, how far down is Starry Stonewort moving year over year. And this past summer, we kind of wrapped up the project, but we still intend, the partnership with Mazurk was really great for us because it built our capacity. It built my expertise on, surveying, on scuba, plant identification. We had multiple interns go through this program and get to work directly with these, really capable researchers. And it was just, a reciprocal relationship, which was really cool to us, especially with all this history of the U of M and Leech Lake in specific. So that was like really a highlight of, it was more, for me, it was more about building that relationship and that capacity and uplifting our staff to kind of take this work on our own, which we plan to continue doing. So like I said, what does the data show? We know for a fact that when we go into Dash, biomass is reduced. There hasn't been an incident where we can say it's eradicated, right? There's not a lot of eradication in invasion science. And so we're hesitant to say, this is the treatment, this is, come hire us, we'll do it. We can't promise anything like that, but we do know it reduces biomass. We do know Starry Stonewort is moving, it's spreading, with our plot surveys. And we do know that we are more effective with Dash when the population is smaller. So early detection, rapid response, EDRR. That's very key to our management work. And I really like this quote from John Trudell. It's from one of his poems. He's an indigenous poet, activist. His poem was talking about more colonization, but he has a line in here that says, "Look at us, we're made of earth and water. Look at them, it is the same." And I really think that about Manoomin, that, it comes from the mud. Our creation story, we come from the mud. We're mostly water. Manoomin comes from the water. So we are the same. It is that relationship. So I just want to thank, Mazurk and everyone that's worked on this. And, we're open to research, good research, research that benefits the tribe, research that aligns with our philosophies. And just overall, just really grateful to have done these projects and, kind of advance these opportunities for other management professionals to say, hey, we don't have to, our first knee-jerk reaction doesn't have to be pesticides or chemicals, especially when we're around sensitive species, whether it's culturally rare, ecologically, whatever. We're not forcing our view on people, but we want to explore options that we can share out and kind of, especially when we're looking out for the Manoomin. So I think that's all I have. Stop sharing here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rainey, and thank you, Steve, so much for your presentations. I'm going to share the slide here for folks to join the Q&A. And I see there have been some questions rolling in. So if you do have any questions for Steve and Rainey, you can I put a link into the chat, so you can either use that link or you can scan the QR code on your screen, or you can go to slido.com and enter the event code in. Any of those three ways will get you there. It also allows you to upvote questions. So if you see a question already that maybe you are going to ask or you just really want to hear the answer to, you can upvote those and it'll move them up to the top of my screen so that I ask them next. If for some reason you're having troubles using Slido, that's okay. Just go ahead and throw your question into the Zoom chat and Michelle will transfer it over so it doesn't get lost and it still becomes part of the question pool over in Slido. I will leave this screen up for just a little bit so folks can get the code and scan as needed, and then I'll take it down. But I'll go ahead and start with the questions now while that's up and folks are finding their way into it. So the first question that rose up to the top was wondering how small the mesh size needs to be on the dash boat to contain the Starry Stonewort fragments or bulbils.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have an exact measurement of the screen size, but if you can imagine like a big sheet metal and it's like holes punched in. So the lowest tier of the screen, what we found is like an average, half an inch or a bulbul, like a large bulbul, is getting caught there, which was really what we were aiming for. So I could probably find out an exact measurement and kind of that and get that, out to you, Megan, or someone else. But yeah, we're really looking at catching those bulbils, especially, and then like the fragments. So that kind of 3 tiers of screens really helps filter out, larger pieces and then getting smaller and smaller. I wish we could do one more thing on the outtake of the hose to collect, any kind of thing that may have gotten through, but that would what we found when we tried it the first time was that the water was backing up quickly. So it's kind of a balance between a fine mesh while also letting that water flow. So.
All right, perfect. Thank you. All right, next question. Steve, I think this one is for you. And they're wondering about the if the vegetation in the quadrats during sampling were sampled with rake or if they were quantified by a visual observation. The question wondering if doing like destructive sampling, like rake sampling, creates disturbance that could then cause spread as well. So a two-part question.
Yeah, rake sampling is destructive, and you're removing plant material when you do that. And I think Rainey kind of touched on it with his previous answer there, but anytime you're manipulating Starry, you run a risk of breaking it up and creating fragments that could spread. Even just a little bit of current could carry that a little bit further. So we were doing some of that rake sampling in like some random points with what started as our initial kind of dash investigation, dash assessment. The quadrats that we're doing in the channels, those longer term monitoring quadrats, and my quadrats in the grids on the interface are non-destructive. We're just observing what's there, and my objective with my grids is to watch those exact same spots over the course of a growing season. So I'm back there every 2 weeks, and I've got some markers in there. I can put my grids in the exact same spots. So we wouldn't want to disturb it in any way. We want to see how things grow and interact left to their own methods. So yeah. So we're selective in what we do with rakes and what we do just observation.
Perfect. Thanks, Steve. All right, moving to the next question. Wondering about the resort on Leech Lake where the Starry Stonewort was found, and wondering if there's been some efforts there now to emphasize decontamination of boats as they either come or go from that resort, or if there's any thought to quarantining the area as well.
Yeah, that's a big question. Like I said, we have a really good working relationship with the resort. I'm hesitant to name them just because that's not what we're here for. But we worked with them to install a CD3 machine that was paid for through a grant, which is like a waterless boat cleaning machine. They allowed the DNR to put up those orange signs, which is voluntary when you're on private property. They've done efforts to clear out their harbor with their working with Cass County to remove Starry Stonewort that's growing in their harbor, so it's less likely to remove. I believe Cass County is focused on a combination of peak biomass and peak boat traffic, which was like right around 4th of July. That's kind of when the resort was booked full, had a lot of out-of-state people out of the area coming in with their own boats. So they wanted to knock down that biomass just to reduce the chance of it either going deeper into the lake or coming out of the lake. Was there another part of that question? Or
I think you touched on both. There was a question about quarantining and decontamination.
Yeah, the quarantining, that's something that's like, so we the tribe got back some land in this land transfer from the federal government, and a couple of them have been public accesses. And we've been debating internally, how do we protect these lakes, when it's on our land? I know with the state, that's probably never going to be a thing, as much as people would ask for it and much as, some of us at Leech Lake would ask for it, but it's a whole different story when it's, either private or public, because people have the right to recreate and access water, and that's what those boat landings are there for. So I'm really hesitant to speak on that at all. But within our lands, there has been discussion of how can we mitigate this, with a little firmer hand, and how can we protect our land that is our lake shore and things like that. So
I just to add a little bit, every time I'm out there working and diving, somebody will come up to me or several people and look, what are you doing? They want to hear about it, and they seem very interested and very supportive, and the resort owners as well. And so I think people like hearing about these kind of efforts, but I also think that there's still a lack of urgency with the boats themselves. People moving boats in and out. I think people can still get kind of a little reckless and not as cautious as they ought to be. So that's an area that I know it's hard to do and it's tricky to do, but I think we need to continue efforts to encourage good boat hygiene. And and I know there are people that are very that do a good job with that, but I think there's some little bit, it can be a little reckless still.
Yeah, I would just reiterate too, for us at Leech Lake, I'm a tribal member. We have these lands reserved for us, a reservation. It's in federal treaties. So when we have a degraded lake, we can't just pick up and go somewhere else. This is our homeland. So we're really concerned about protecting these things and really encourage, our state partners, county partners that, this is why we want very, reactive and proactive, but we want management done and we demand it because we can't just go somewhere else. People start moving north to go to these lakes. People say this lake doesn't have walleyes anymore, so I'm gonna go try Canada. And it's kind of like the shift of, especially in the angling community that we've seen around here, of our kind of more secluded lakes are getting more traffic, things like that. But yeah, we're this was reserved for us, and so we're doing our best to take care of it. And we really need, buy-in from the general public to do that. So
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing all that. Oops, sorry, excuse me. Okay. Um, the next question was wondering about if you're aware of if there's any adjacent lake managers who use like copper-based algicides or anything like that, and what they might be seeing with those tools.
yeah, we're lucky that we've developed these relationships with. So Leech Lake shares jurisdiction with 4 counties: Beltrami, Cass, Hubbard, and Itasca. It shares jurisdiction with the National Forest, the Chippewa National Forest, and then of course the state of Minnesota as a whole. So we're really lucky that we built these relationships with the county managers that work with AIS, the state DNR representatives, and the U.S. Forest Service to they understand why we don't use chemicals. We're not. I don't hate chemicals and things. I think they be effective, but we're following our tribal laws, right? So really, it's good to establish why we're doing it, and it's really been helpful to have these partners like support us as we support them. But in the county outside the reservation, there is pesticide use. I can't talk to the effectiveness of much of that, but there is treatments to being done. Steve, and I invite Dan also or Naomi to talk about pesticide effectiveness. But there's also like benthic barriers being done with burlap sacks in Hubbard County. There's some, other novel methods and other traditional methods, but I just don't have enough experience in that to speak broadly about it.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. And I'll just chime in here real briefly that we have done some research looking at the effectiveness of copper-based algicides, and we had an earlier webinar on that topic, which I'll find and drop into the chat if people are interested. But largely what we found is that algicides can be effective for providing temporary biomass reduction, nuisance relief, but we don't see the same degree of effectiveness in terms of reducing population sizes that can be the case with other aquatic invasive plants.
Thanks, Dan. Okay. Next question to come to list are wondering about if there's any known relationships between Manoomin and other macroalgae like the caras and stoneworts.
Yeah, for sure there is. So if you look at a wild rice bed, you can see a lot of, sometimes it looks like that's all that's there is wild rice, but even underneath that, there's always other things there. Some of the Naha species, caras, and some pondweeds, they're always, intermingled with the rice, and they all have their kind of they can cycle a little bit. So some areas might be favoring some of these other things, lily pads or pondweeds even in some years, and maybe other years that same area is completely full with thick rice. But so there is a relationship with some of these species. And I've even looked in, some like look a little bit further down where we don't have star yet in some of the same area, and trying to just see what it looks like naturally. And there's plants and some of the cara and the pondweeds and the Naha guadalupensis. You'll see that crowded right up in some areas with the rice. So yeah, there are certainly a plant community association there. But again, with the Starry, you're adding a whole new player to the game, and Starry has some traits that allow it um, to thrive in some areas. So, adding a new player to a kind of a system that's in balance and equilibrium can upset everything.
Yeah, thank you. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off my screen share so folks don't need to just stare at a big QR code. But if you aren't in the Q&A yet, there's a link in the chat for you. And let me see. Now I need to rearrange my screen too. Here we go. Okay. So I think I've seen the next question, a couple versions of it throughout, but there's the one at the top mentions that they don't necessarily have an educational background when it comes to conservation. But they're a concerned community member and they want to know what they can do to help. And I think I've seen some other variations on this, on how folks can get involved. Is there any kind of advocacy that they can do, or if you have suggestions for them along those lines?
Yeah, a lot of this AIS early detection is being done by community people and community scientists, and there's efforts like the AIS Detectors and well, I don't remember what it's called, but they even have events where people go out and look for these species, and a lot of places, Leech Lake Band included, are developing materials and handouts and websites to make it easy for people to, if they see something, they're not even sure what it is, but I don't know if I ever saw this here, to make a report, to make a report. Somebody with expertise can go out and determine if that's a invasive species or something else. So I think there are a lot of ways to get involved, and um, there are periodically events where people work together and train each other on identifying these things, and go look for areas where there might be some new invaders.
Yeah, I would add that just kind of educating yourself on aquatic plants, they're often overlooked. But there's a lot of material provided by Mazer, DNR, part of our, and I see Ethan just plugged it. Part of this research project with Mazer was helping us develop a reporting website, which is reportaisllbo.com. There's a lot of good kind of overview of, species of concerns on there. And there's also a, geolocated survey where you can report suspicious plants. So we were focusing on our rice gatherers. If they're out in the rice bed and they see something suspicious, they can use this website to report that. But anyone within the reservation can use it for, any time of the year. It goes to me. So I can get, the reports off there. I check it, I try to check it every couple weeks, especially over the summer when I have time. But there's also things like iNaturalist, EDD maps, several other apps that will, you can take a picture and it'll scan the plant and it'll give you some suggestions of what it thinks it might be. But a lot of those apps or sites will send that to a professional that can actually take a closer look, and then that's also geolocated. So it's really like quick response times on something that may be new or introduced. For example, my supervisor gets reports from EdMaps to, somebody reports a new species. It goes to her email. She can review it and say, oh, that's a native Cara. We don't have to worry about that. Or that might be a Starry Stonewort plant. Go take a closer look, that type of deal. And shout out to Star Trek, because that's a really great resource. I think it was Beltrami County that found, unfortunately, a new population this year, and that was Star Trek volunteers. So,
Yeah, thank you. All right. All right, Rainey, I think the next one is for you. Wondering if you can describe how the dash unit gets decontaminated when it's returning from working at one of the contaminated sites.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I'd like to address, or I didn't address it rather. So we have a decon unit land a machine that you would see at, boat landings that DNR is manning or the counties. So this year, for example, we were kind of on a every other week basis with my crew. So at the end of the week, we would break down the machine, do the hot water decon on it. We'd really concerned about like the pump and things like that. So flushing it, doing all the basic decons that you would for any other watercraft. And then we had the ability to let it dry for a week between sites. We always scheduled our treatments for one lake for 1 week, so we weren't bouncing off. We weren't increasing that risk of spreading. But yeah, we do a full decon, and I make sure it's I've trained my crew to look at all the things that I was taught as through the DNR as being a level 2 inspector. From the trailer to the pontoon to all our screens. We even decon our dive equipment at the end of the week with some kind of like light chlorine and hot water washing of our wetsuits, of our BCDs, all that thing. So great question, because that is important.
Right. All right. Next question is wondering about if things like lake water depth or clarity or chemistry can affect the starry stonewort growth and propagation in comparison to wild rice.
Yeah, that's a good question. For sure, the site, water chemistry, and sediment composition and chemistry affect how starry will grow. We've seen some starry lakes or some places where starry's been introduced where it really just blew up and took over. Coronis and Moose Lake are a couple examples. And there's some other places where a starry's been detected and it didn't really do that. I mean, it's continuing to grow there, but maybe patchy, much thinner. So clearly, the environment affects the growth of starry. I think that wild rice beds are a little unique. I think they kind of create their own environment. Again, I mentioned all that biomass, all the plants fall into the lake every year, and all that decomposition creates an incredible amount of nutrients, especially nitrogen, that support the next year's growth. So that's a little bit different. I think that's a reason why you can see people have tried efforts to reseed wild rice. And if you don't have the right substrate or the right nutrients present, it doesn't really take. You need a continuous supply of nitrogen and that sort of thing. So they're different, and those factors certainly can affect the growth of starry stonewort and the wild rice. And so if the starry stonewort moves into a place with wild rice, maybe the equation gets shifted a little bit. Is the wild rice taking some of that nitrogen that would have been available to wild rice? That's one of the things we're looking to investigate.
Great, thanks, Steve. Okay, I've seen a couple other questions wondering about herbicides, but they're both specifically wondering about if you're aware of off-target impacts. So if someone were to use an herbicide to treat starry stonewort, what's the concern then around Manoomin, and if there's any impacts documented in that way?
Boy, I don't. Maybe we can have Dan help again here with this one. Thinking again about the Leech Lake's approach, and part of that approach is we can't be certain that there will be a negative impact if we start adding something to the lake to some of the things we're concerned about, rice or anything else. I think that they've been able to target these things fairly specifically, and some of it has to do with time of application and being precise in where it's actually placed. But I guess I'm not sure that anybody completely understands medium term or long term what other side effects there might be from some of these kinds of applications, whether it's a pesticide or copper algicide or something else.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Okay, so going back to the dash, they're wondering if you can also use that then to like filter out bulbils or rhizoids from the lake bottom or sediment, or is it mostly the plant that's growing in the water column that you're targeting with it?
Yeah, so that was, we talked about the technical issues on Steamboat Bay. The sediment on Steamboat is really soft and organic and flocculent. And, one day I was like, well, I'm just going to see how deep this goes. And I put my arm in there and it went all the way in and I didn't feel anything firm. As I took my arm out, I could feel rhizoids and bulbils and I pulled out some. So when we do target bulbils, we tend to get a lot of sediment with that, which slows down our process because our screens get clogged, our hose gets clogged, and then visibility and safety is instantly gone because it's so, you just can't, it just spreads into the water column. So we can't see. So then we typically have to move on to a different spot and we feel like we're not getting a lot of like quality work done there. So that's something, that we found in a sandier lake, like on the Mississippi. It was a lot easier to get bulbils out of the water because that sand was heavier and it would tend to fall quicker back, settle quicker. So yeah, I mean, that's the big question is how do we get those bulbils out effectively? And that's something that we're willing to explore and really don't have an answer for right now. But it is kind of really site specific on how effective that part is.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks, Rainey.
Mm-hmm.
So I know you touched a little bit about Eurasian water milfoil too, but there's also a question wondering about any other invasive aquatic plants of concern and if there's also a threat for those towards wild rice.
Yeah, for our management sake, luckily we only have 2 lakes with Eurasian water milfoil. We are in the process of kind of subcontracting or subawarding with the Leech Lake Travel College. They have a grant to explore Eurasian water milfoil in Manoomin on kind of the opposite side of Leech Lake on Headquarters Bay. They call it the Eurasian water milfoil has been in Leech Lake for 20 years, I think, 2004 or so. And this rice bed has really been degraded. So we're going to look at reseeding wild rice and removal of Eurasian water milfoil and different combinations of those treatments. So, for example, one site will be just reseeding, one site will be just removal of EWM, and then one site's a combination, and then one site's a control, et cetera. But as far as other species, I've been at this conference this week, and there's a lot of talk about rusty crayfish affecting Manoomin in different parts of the state. We haven't explored or taken a close look at that because, we haven't seen much damage from rusty crayfish. We have it in Leech, or have them in Leech and Cass Lake and Winnie. But that might be another big threat. I think we have such healthy rice beds that even if they are eating some of it, it's not, it's not affecting the rice as much as kind of these other stressors, climate change, water temps, ice cover, all these other things. But it is something to be concerned about. Is rusty crayfish, I would say, is the next biggest one. We're kind of shielded from carp, but that's kind of like my nightmare scenario is getting any kind of invasive carp in this area because, just seeing what they do to lakes and vegetation, it's just absolutely horrifying. So
Yeah.
I think thinking about some of the, other kinds of aquatic invasive plants, curly-leaf pondweed, Eurasian milfoil, some of those, like there's a site on Leech Lake where it looks like that there's a bunch of Eurasian milfoil there and the rice is being degraded. The thing about Starry was always in an aggressive, when it's growing aggressively, it can create those pillows and really dominate that area and cover everything up, literally crowd everything else out. Some of those other plants wouldn't proceed like that necessarily. So even early on, even before Starry got anywhere near Leech Lake, it was always like, well, this stuff looks like it could potentially be a real problem if it got to the rice. And we still, I guess, we're watching it in real time. We don't know exactly what could happen. Maybe there's some level of coexistence could happen if the rice is able to, maintain um, and continue to germinate before the starry gets going in the spring. So the starry growth form is created a greater concern than some of the other kinds of plants.
All right. Next question about Dash was wondering about the work that's been done in Anderson's Cove Harbor and wondering what your thoughts are, if there's been a difference made from the Dash work there.
Just from hearing from our counterparts at the county, they're really focused on that biomass reduction. We haven't interacted too much in the harbor because we feel that's kind of like outside of our responsibility. It kind of blurs that line between, what we do, what we want to do for our management and like helping out a private area. Um, but I will say that, we are in full support of all that treatment done there. Um, but for me, I'm not sure if they're seeing reduction year over year, or if they're taking that data. But there is definite, biomass reduction, and they kind of narrowed down the timing of it. That's really important. There's only a limited number of funds for this work, so they're really focusing on, again, high traffic days for that resort and reducing biomass. So
I think, they've in the last few years they've done some dashing in that harbor, and you'll see certainly a reduction for a period of time, but then that Starry Stonewort will come back and maybe be as abundant as it was before. So I think that to be able to really reduce it for any period of time, you'd have to be able to get all the material out of there, all the bulbos and whatever. So you can remove a lot of biomass, and that helps prevent stuff from being carried into the lake for sure. But I think it'd be a pretty big effort to eradicate it from a place like that, the harbor. I think there's probably a lot of bulbils in the sediment, and it'd be difficult. It'd be a real challenge.
Yeah. All right. Next question. I think I see this question in two different forms. I'm going to try and combine these two, but going back to the question about removing the bulbils and working through the sediment for that. I think there's two questions. One about like in areas where you are able to do that, are there concerns for impacts to non-native benthic organisms? And then I think another question that, here it is. I'm wondering if that would then remove native seeds or other propagules that are in there as well.
yeah, in my experience, we have found like Manoomin seeds when we do that, which is, concerning, of course. We've also found, invertebrates and had some bycatch with other, like lily pad roots, for example, is a kind of an obvious one that we can like feel real time while we're doing it. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of like that. Do we want to stir up the sediment, give these bulbils a chance to kind of rise to the top while we're removing some of them? That's kind of why Steamboat has been on the pause, because it's such a unique substrate that we're really cautious about all that stuff. So I hope that answers it. Maybe Steve can add some more about the other species, but yeah, it's kind of something we haven't honed in on quite yet, but are wanting to.
I think, yeah, I guess I just add this. I think any of these removal techniques is kind of a dramatic step, considering the natural setting. So there's gonna be a level of disturbance, and I guess you have to weigh, will we be able to remove starry or something else, whatever you're interested in, and maybe you do upset some other things and disturb some other things, but you hope that they'll recover. And there's propagules and other things in the area that'll help naturally restore those areas. But yeah, any of these removals, it's kind of a little bit destructive, and you got to get a little messy. And so I don't think it's possible to do something like that and not have some disturbance of some other things there.
Sure. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Okay. And I think you've mentioned that you're kind of doing your best to not disturb too much of the sediment and to be creating big plumes since it's hard to work in and such. But there was a question in areas where that happens, do you use any kind of curtains or anything to try and contain that, or does it settle out pretty quickly?
Yeah, another good point. So like on the Mississippi River, part of our permit application for the DNR IAPM invasive aquatic plant management permit was that we had to install silt screens or similar to silt screens. So what we did is kind of built a C shape around our work area to kind of maybe not catch the fragments that may be there, but at least stop them so they could sink down and stay contained. How effective that is, we were hoping we did it the right way, and it's really hard to work in water. I don't know if anyone's done stuff on scuba, but so there is mitigations like that we do. And then like for Eurasian water milfoil, those fragments tend to float. So when we were doing that work, we had somebody on a kayak and kind of doing the spotter work while, scooping up fragments as much as possible.
Right. All right. Next question that's kind of quickly risen to the top here is wondering about how much acreage you end up going through and filtering a typical season with your dash.
Can you say that again?
Yeah, what acreage are you typically treating or filtering through with the dash system in a typical system?
Yeah.
Typical season, sorry.
Yeah. So we measure more by weight, water weight of the plant material. So at the end of the day, my crew will, grab a scale. We have to remove it. Obviously, we have to put it above the ordinary high water mark so it's not flowing right back into the lake. So we're taking out, I think our max of one day was at Pamoosh this year, and I think it was like 2,000 pounds. So we spent a week, almost 2 weeks at Pamoosh. But the area of the work was like a quarter acre. So if you can imagine how much biomass is in a quarter acre and expand that out to somewhere like Steamboat Bay, where we're estimating, upwards of 4 acres of spread, it's like we could spend a summer there and maybe not even put a dent in it. So that's why we're really focused on these like high traffic areas, and also early detection, smaller or early detection, like newer infestations, I guess.
Yeah. Wow, that is an incredible amount of Starry Stonewort in a day.
Yeah.
All right. The next question that I'm seeing is wondering about if there's any specific native plants that Starry Stonewort can cause the most harm to in the lakes that you are monitoring and caring for.
I guess I don't have specific details on that, but yeah, it seems when it gets really bad, like at that, the Mississippi River site, that first year we went out there, it was like, I think we estimated about 95% Starry Stonewort. And then as we removed it, it gave a chance for native plants to come out. So it kind of, in those situations, I feel it's outcompeting everything. But as we look at our permanent plots, we're seeing kind of on that kind of the edge of the invasion front that there's other things that are kind of growing up, like the Nahas and the Manoomin. Native Kara seems to be somewhat okay with it, interacting with Starry Stonewort and holding its ground. But just from what I've seen working, it's kind of the big pillowy is kind of bad for everything.
I've yeah, when it's growing aggressively like that and creating those big pillows, it can potentially crowd out everything and affect everything that's there, all the plants, everything that's there. I saw quite a bit of that last year in my grids on the interface. where the Starry was kind of really just crowding in there, and a significant reduction in everything else. You could see it happening throughout the growing season. This year it looks a little bit different. I mean, there are some species that seem to be holding their own, like some Naha species, and I've seen some places where several species of native Kara are thriving again in an area that was essentially dominated by Starry Stonewort the year before. So I guess it's going to be interesting to continue to watch this and see what happens. But when it's in that aggressive growth form, it'll essentially, potentially shut down everything else. At least in those areas where it's making a lot of biomass.
Great, thank you. Okay, next question on the list is wondering about if there's like a list of some sort for historical presence of Manoomin across the Great Lakes region, like in areas where it's supposed to be, if it maybe weren't for development or human-induced changes to waterways.
Yeah, I've been interested in this for different projects and also just personally. So what I found in a different presentation I did was looking at herbarium species. So herbarium is a collection of dried and pressed plants that typically will have like location data and date and all this really cool information. And a lot of herbariums are getting digitized now, so all this it's searchable really easily. You don't have to go into a library like and start digging through plants. It's all a lot of it's getting online now. So the spread across the U.S. is quite, really opened my eyes to finding specimens from early 1900s down in Texas and Kansas and the Dakotas and Montana and out east and Massachusetts around the Great Lakes. So it is really widespread. For Minnesota, we that's a big thing, a whole nother discussion, like what the Minnesota DNR considers wild rice waters and what us as a sovereign nation consider rice waters is very different. Anywhere that can grow rice, anywhere that has even just one rice, we consider a rice water, and we would like to see the same protections extended to those bodies of water. I'm not exactly sure how the Minnesota DNR defines a rice water, but yeah, I mean, there's certainly, and then we rely on the phrase is kind of like traditional ecological knowledge, but we really take in consideration what our tribal members have told us. I used to rice here, and now there's no rice here. So we consult things like historic imagery, whether that's satellite or flyovers. I know there's work being done on sediment cores and things like that, looking for rice seed, and eDNA is getting popular. We're kind of considering maybe some of that in the future. But yeah, it's really eye-opening to see the kind of historic spread of Manoomin. And I would really encourage people to take a look at online herbariums and for any species, and it's really a great resource.
Yeah, there's data and mapping projects that have shown that the range of wild rice is receding. There used to be more rice in this area, Minnesota and Wisconsin, further south than we see it now. And even some of these, maybe middle of the state, we got a few scattered rice beds. There used to be more rice beds, and so it's been a trend for a while. And you can think about what some of the reasons might be. Development certainly is one, and in Minnesota especially, we've historically drained a lot of wetlands, changed a lot of hydrology. That's probably a factor as well. And some people also believe that people actually being in the rice, like on the Leech Lake Reservation, there's a lot of people harvesting rice every year, and that continual interaction actually helps sustain those particular populations. So, but rice is receding. The range of wild rice is receding, and one thing we're also concerned about is what does climate change mean for that change in range of wild rice that could have more of an impact.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephen Raining. We have made it all the way to 2:30. I'm going to put a quick screen up with our just kind of final housekeeping pieces. So thanks to everyone who joined us today to listen to this session with Steve and Raining. It's been really great. I learned a whole bunch. And we did record it. So if there's anything that you're hoping to come back and reference later, we'll have that up on our YouTube channel. If you're registered, which you had to be if you're listening to me now live, you'll get an email when that goes out. So you should be able to see that. Watch your inboxes. There will also be a survey that pops up when it's time to go, and we'd really appreciate if you took some time to complete that survey for us. And I do have contact information on. We got through most of the questions, but there were a couple left. So if you have any lingering questions that for Steve or Raining, both of their email addresses are showing on the screen right now. If you have questions about the program or the webinar series in general, you can reach out to us at AIS Detectors at umn.edu as well. But thanks everyone for joining us for our extended webinar time. We really appreciate it. And again, Steve and Raining, really appreciate you taking the time to share all of what you had with us today.
Big glitch.